Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to offer Dana, then please do go to justthiszen.org/giving. Your support really does make a huge difference. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you for all coming back. Thank you. Feels like another opportunity to spend time together, reflecting on and feeling our way into what it might mean to let the beauty you love be what you do, and the 100 ways to kneel and kiss the ground. And I hadn't heard the list that Flint offered last night, attempt what is not certainty. What not certain. Certainty may or may not come later. This is my favourite one. It may then be a valuable delusion. And so the list is going to be available on the Linktree, so if you want to explore it some more, then please do. But what it put in my mind immediately was Mary Oliver's tiny little poem called Instructions for Living a Life. Pay attention. Be astonished. Tell about it. Pay attention. Be astonished. Tell about it. I thought, one long list, one very short one. These are all kind of pointers, aren't they, to how we might find our way through, like Ra said last night, you know, the many difficulties that life throws up for us. It's not easy. It's not easy being this human being. The world is a complex and difficult place to navigate. And I've been thinking a lot about that sense of beauty, and how the beauty we love might inhabit what we do in the most ordinary and uneventful moments of our lives, not just waiting for the moments to be awestruck. And those of people who were on Zoom last night or weren't here yesterday won't have heard the myriad little snapshots of people's worlds that we shared in the pantoums, that suddenly a fire escape could become beautiful, or a stone in the garden, or just some really losing your mittens in the snow. I mean, there's something about the tiny moments in our lives that we can pay attention to. And Flint talked about the many ways we can let the Dharma we love be what we do, and how the first noble truth of suffering, you know, that life has difficulty and discontent in it, but when we can find some ease and freedom in us being us, and what a great question Ben asked, what does that even mean? Which us? You know, for those of us who've studied our minds, dear God, which us? Which me is it that I'm talking about? And I remember at various times in my life, you know, somebody saying to me, how are you? And I'm like, if I was a lighthouse, the light could go round about 13 different kinds of places that I could be. And it's like, I could give you an answer for any one of those. And they would all have some veracity, and they would all have some truth, but they would be partial. There would be a partial picture of how I'm doing. So I think for many of us, that kind of question of, you know, being me, what could that even mean? And I wanted today to kind of focus a little bit on the tension we can experience between that sense of appreciating beauty and becoming attached to beauty persisting. Becoming attached to the longing for life to be different. There's a poem that many of us will know about the love dogs and how the longing is the calling of our inner self. It is the calling of our innate goodness. But we experience it as our longing, and when we experience it as our longing, we experience it as lack. I am longing. I am lonely. And I think when Flint was talking yesterday, he said, not your anger, but the anger. Something about how when we cannot grip it so firmly as ours, but to feel the longing that is the longing that brings us all here, that helps us all to sit down in this place when we often haven't got a clue what we're doing, when we often don't experience it as joyful or expansive. And maybe you do, I just know. But it's like however you're experiencing that, something keeps us coming back to the practice. And there's a tension that's been in Buddhism for virtually since Buddha started talking about his teachings, about attachment and about longing and about desire and about letting go. And we're constantly walking this line between allowing ourselves to be in this human body, use our senses to be in the world, and then find ways to let it go, to not try and make it permanent. There's an article by Ken Spielmeyer in Tricycle magazine, and he opens with a really strong opening statement. He says, "Beauty has always been for Buddhism an intractable koan." It's always been an intractable koan, a conundrum that it has never quite resolved. To most of us, a life without beauty would seem scarcely living at all, and yet, he says, the Dharma has kept it at arm's length for the last 25 centuries. And I don't always agree with everybody I read. I don't know how it is for you. And I thought, like Flint, actually it was beauty that attracted me. It was the beauty of the poetry, of the architecture, of the gardens, of the writing, of the way that I don't know if you've ever had this experience of doing the silent walking and feeling something of the connection, the beauty of the ritual, the beauty of sitting down, the beauty of doing something in that very constrained way that we're invited to do. So I was interested in that as a statement. But the point of the piece that he's making is how we manage the endless paradox of non-attachment and emptiness, and the way that life comes to us through a body. It comes to us through a body and through our senses. Life is a visceral experience. It's not an idea. You don't wake up in the morning and have an idea of your life. You wake up in your body, and your body moves through the day. Your senses are always working, and your mind is part of that. So here we are in this place where we're being asked to invite beauty, and we're also being asked to say, don't get too attached. A lot of what you're thinking and feeling is delusion, is ignorance, is clinging, is attachment. So how do we sit with this beauty at the beginning and beauty in the middle and beauty at the end? How do we dance with this, connecting with the world through being in this body and letting go and allowing ourselves to move into a greater sense of emptiness, where every paradox can be, because no paradox is possible. If we're in the place where there is no division, there's no separation. there's no paradox. But we also dwell in a place where we experience paradox. So in kind of wrangling with this, I've kind of been leaning into 3 different stories that are well-known kind of Zen stories. And the first one is, I'm sure many of you will have heard it, and it's a senior monk and a junior monk are traveling together. At one point, they come across a river with a really strong current, no bridge. And as the monks were preparing to cross the river, they saw a very young and very beautiful young woman also attempting to cross. The young woman asked if they could help her cross to the other side. The 2 monks glanced at one another because they had taken vows not to touch a woman. Then, without a word, the older monk picked up the woman, carried her across the river, placed her gently on the other side, and carried on his way. The younger monk was like, "Oh God, what just happened?" He couldn't believe it. And after rejoining his companion, he was speechless. And an hour passed without a word between them, and then 2, and then 3, until finally the young monk couldn't contain himself any longer and said, "As monks, we're not permitted to touch a woman. How could you carry that woman on your shoulders?" And the older monk looked at him and said, "Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river. Why are you still carrying her?" It's so great, isn't it? It's like the older monk followed what was necessary. What is an appropriate response to this situation? The appropriate response is to support and help a fellow human being. But the young monk was much more tied up with his ideas of right and wrong, and he couldn't let it go. He couldn't let it go. And being a bodhisattva in the world is to answer the question, what's needed here? Is it more within the precepts to leave this be, to founder, or to provide assistance, to let that go and meet the next thing on the road? Some of you will know that we have a lovely granddaughter, Misha, who often is phoning and texting for support, and quite often she forgets that we have our Sangha on a Thursday night, and we'll get a text saying, can we take her home, the trains are cancelled again. And we kind of often look at each other and it's like, I'm sorry, we're too busy being Buddhist. And it's a genuine kind of dilemma. It's like, what's the appropriate response here? You know, to take care of our Sangha, to take care of what we're doing, or to give a lift. And the answer differs on different nights, but it's a really interesting thing about what's the appropriate response, not what's my idea, but what seems to be called. There's a lovely phrase from Hakomi about the difference between what's called up, which is usually our habits and our conditioning, and what's called for. In this moment, if I can approach it with beginner's mind, what's actually required here? What's actually called for? So we're responding to what we're actually seeing. What's the need? And when we can get rooted in the thisness of this world, not just in the constructs of our mind, we can see what's actually called for, what's required. And that's where I really like that very first one of the artist, Richard, it's called Diebenkorn. So Richard Diebenkorn's attempt what is not certain. Certainty may or may not come later. It may then be a valuable delusion. And often when we sit, we're invited to have this mind of no gaining idea. So when we're trying to offer this thing of what's called for in the world, we also have to let go of outcome. It's like I can't do this and ensure this will happen. It's like I'm going to do this and then meet what unfolds from that. Not do this so that this will occur. I'm going to do this, I'm going to give it my best shot. And then let's see what happens, and then I'll try and meet that. And for me, this is so close to this idea of allowing the tides of beauty to arise and then disperse. If I insist that everything or nothing is beautiful, then I'm not actually seeing what is occurring. I'm not actually in this moment noticing this here and now. There's an old experiment. I couldn't find the origins of it, but the experiment was that they got about 50 people, and before the experiment began, the people were self-declared either optimists or pessimists. So it was a self-declaration. I see the world this way. I see the world as an optimist, or I see the world in a much more pessimistic way. And then the 50 people were invited one at a time to walk along a path and go to another building. What they didn't know was that the experiment was that a $20 bill had been left on the path between them and the building that they were walking to, accidentally dropped. Far more of the optimists saw the $20 bill and picked it up. And for the optimists, they thought, great, this is a good start to the day, yay. Far fewer of the self-declared pessimists saw the money, and those that picked it up were frightened, because they thought, now a good thing's happened, it means something really bad is going to happen. So it's really fascinating, isn't it? It's like that attitude that we take into the world that we may not even know we have is going to determine how we're responding to the world. What if we think this means a bad thing's going to happen, or this means a good thing's going to happen? And then we tend to follow the path that we're kind of setting ourselves. So how do we see the world, and what do we keep carrying way past the other side of the river? You know, what hurts and beliefs and ideas have we not set down? What do we carry? Lucky days, unlucky days? And for me, I have that sense that sitting is one of the deepest ways, as we practice again and again, of just seeing the flow of our experience. I mean, do you notice the same you that sits down? Do you have the same kind of thoughts? Do you have the same kind of ideas? And do you notice how they also shift? So you experience your continuity, but you also experience that everything changes and passes. And we keep inviting ourselves to do that, where there is nothing to be achieved. We're not trying to get somewhere in our sitting. We're not trying, well, if you're anything like me, you probably are, trying quite hard not to feel quite so much pain, trying to stay awake, trying to have some marvellous experience. I don't know what it is you're trying, but I imagine we are doing that, and we're also noticing, I'm trying this. Recently I had, as we said, a wonderful time down in Cornwall, and it's like there's something about the place that touches something deeply in me, the light and the amount of art and beauty. It really does seem to feel like a nourishing soul place for me. And I could feel, we were visiting various artists, and I could feel both my love and my greed arising in equal measure. I could feel the way that I was looking and really appreciating things, but I was also kind of like, what could I have? Which one? And the which one became really painful. You know, if I choose this, then I can't have that. If I do this, then I can't have that. If I go to this, I can't do that. And I was really sitting and noticing. And Flint, in one of his inquiries, gave a talk about shadows. And as often is the case for me, I kind of found his talk and this closeness to my own greed really interesting and illuminating. I got curious about it. And I got curious and I wrote a poem. So this is what I wrote. Lately, I've been thinking about greed and shadows. How on a walk through a steep rambling path between moorland and sea, my eyes might be grasping for an elusive extra. A hawk, a seal, a feather tangled in the humming ivy. As if my eyes can't be filled enough, fulfilled by what is already here, the bountiful here. And how this greed is a shadow of my delight, my absolute delight in the blooming, buzzing suchness of life, a drinking in of rapturous life. But left unchecked, it does not invite satiation, only grasping more and more and more. Take a breath. Maybe now, sometimes, my greed and my delight might meander warm hand in warm hand, shadow, substance, and a world that is just as it is, enough. So seeing my greed as actually like your longing, like my longing, also an expression of life. Not something to be ashamed of or not something to be given into, but something to really notice. This is me longing to drink in life. That's what it is. It's, Joan Halifax has a term, the near enemies. It's like a near enemy. And if I could sit with it and notice it, it's telling me something precious. This is what I long for. And then Mary Oliver has another version of this. Oh, to love what is lovely and will not last. What a task to ask of anything or anyone, yet it is ours, and not by the century or the year, but by the hours. One full day I heard above me, and above the sting of the wind, a sound I didn't know. And my look shot upward. It was a flock of snow geese winging it faster than the ones we usually see, and being the colour of snow catching the sun, so they were in part at least golden. I held my breath as we do sometimes to stop time when something wonderful has touched us, as with a match which is lit and bright but does not hurt in the common way. But delightfully, as if delight was the most serious thing you ever felt. I thought of Flint talking about beauty and terror, sitting so close. But delightful as if delight were the most serious thing you ever felt. The geese flew on. I have never seen them again. Maybe I will, someday, somewhere. Maybe I won't. It doesn't matter. What matters is that when I saw them as though through the veil, secretly, joyfully, clearly. A moment of clear seeing, not hanging on. And the second story for me is how we can really deeply appreciate impermanence and our capacity to be present. So that if we really know life is impermanent, this is a moment, a little fraction of time that we're occupying, can we be fully, wholeheartedly present to it? And this is a story from Mark Epstein's books, Thoughts Without a Thinker. He was talking about his teacher, Ajahn Chah. He said, "You see this goblet?" asks Ajahn Chah, the Thai meditation master. "For me, this glass is already broken. I enjoy it. I drink out of it. It holds my water admirably, sometimes even reflecting the sun in beautiful patterns. If I should tap it, it has a lovely ring to it. But when I put this glass on the shelf and the wind knocks it over, or my elbow brushes it off the table and it falls to the ground and shatters, I say, of course, of course. When I understand that the glass is already broken, every moment with it is precious." It's an interesting concept, idea, or feeling for me is like, if this body is already dead, if this time is already over, if this glass is already broken, and yet, can I be here? Can I be here wholeheartedly? The flowers are here, some of them are already turning up their little toes. Are they less beautiful? Have they done their job any less well? We're here. We're fully here. And the Japanese, I was talking about wabi-sabi yesterday, and this sense of time. How do we not cling on to time? How do we flow through time? How do we be time? And the Japanese thrill to the cherry blossom. There's a whole industry. There are people employed in huge numbers to be really precise about when the cherry blossom is going to come. I have to say their lives are getting more and more troublesome with climate change because it's getting less and less predictable. But there are time stops for a lot of people during cherry blossom time in Japan. There are huge sort of walks, there are whole itineraries to go and visit the cherry blossom because they know it's not going to last. It's incredibly beautiful and it's not going to last. Can you drink it in while it's there? And as I've been writing these talks, I sit on my sofa and there's a little tiny acer in a pot, and each morning its leaves have gone a little bit yellow, and if the wind's up it loses more of its leaves, and it's like it's just doing its acer thing. It's just doing its little leafy life, letting go of what's no longer going to serve it. And I think there's often a quote about, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. But there's something for me about that. People often say, I didn't know how precious this was. And that can be their health, that can be their partner, that can be their bodies. I took it for granted. I didn't know what I'd got until it had gone. And in a way, hi Marie, lovely to see you. And many of us have that experience of only knowing what we've had when it's gone, or when it's threatened, or when it's in trouble. But our sitting practice is a way of trying to help us, support us to be with what's actually here right now, in the moment, that always carries that enoughness. I was listening to a devastating podcast on Gaza, and in it, a father, I don't know if I can say this without crying. in it a father said he said goodbye to his children every night. Not good night. He said goodbye to his children every night because he didn't know if they would be alive in the morning or he would be alive in the morning. That's a pretty strong feeling for me. We live with a kind of privileged luxury where we think that's not going to happen to us. But every good night could be a goodbye. Every time we leave this sendo, the same people might not come back for all sorts of reasons. How do we bear the beauty and the terror of living with this kind of impermanence? How do we do that? I do it because I love you guys, because I love my family, because I love life. But I also know this, we say, oh, next year, Flint might be coming in May. And then we're like, well, we'll see. How do we live life as a precious, momentary gift that may or may not be here the same, and almost certainly won't be for all of us at different points in our life? And the last story is a story that's Ram Dass told that I heard many years ago. I have to confess, this is one that's pissed me off for some time. So this story is that an old Zen monk was dying and he'd finished everything. He was about to get off the wheel. He was just floating away, free and in his pure Buddha mind, when a thought passed by of a beautiful deer that he'd once seen in a field. And he held on to that thought for just a second because of its beauty. And he immediately took birth again as a deer. I thought that was really unfair. And it's taken me a long time to kind of get my sense of what that might be meaning, because it felt so unfair to me to be resting on that spontaneous moment of beauty was enough to get back on the wheel. I don't know how they knew he came back as a deer. That bit of the story eludes me. And I myself have no coherent thoughts at all about reincarnation. But it feels like it's somehow making the same point to me as the old monk crossing the river. How do we open to beauty? How do we open to the beauty of this life and let it go? How do we be with the sublimeness and the terror and the ugliness and the rawness and the unfairness and the whatever it is? How do we be fully with it and let it go? I personally thought there might be something really peaceable about coming back as a deer, but I don't know. But Ram Dass was making the point in the story that we need to do the work of what he calls the really hairy stuff inside. That just focusing on being peaceful or spiritual is not going to address all the old habit patterns that we cling to. We have to look directly at our habit patterns. All of them. There's a well-known poem, The Guest House, and it says we have to welcome them. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. But don't invite them to stay. Give them a warm cup of tea and let them go. They don't have to take up residence. What if our work in sitting and being with each other and being in the Sangha and being with our families is about making space for everything, allowing and letting go, allowing and letting go, seeing the transient, spectacular beauty of life and letting what we do be an expression of what we love. We were talking last night and we were talking about what are the things we love, you know, what is the beauty that we love. And I hope you don't mind me saying, Sophie was talking about the beauty of herding cows. That there are moments of the animals moving down the mountain, of the sound of the bells, of the crystal clear air in the mountains, and the individual characters of each cow, and the being in the flow of that moment, and that being the beauty of what we love. That it isn't just creating things, it's living our lives with some grace, some dignity, some splendor in all of the mistakes and the awfulness that we also live in. We all mess up. We all get things wrong. How do we let those go too? There's a little piece that from one of the Chinese stories. A government officer, Lu Husuan, was talking with Nan Chuan, and he said, "Master, the teachings," Chao said, "heaven and earth have the same root, myriad things, and I are one body. This is quite marvellous." So he really thinks we're all one, and it's all in our minds, all the separation is in our minds. And Nan Chuan pointed to a flower in the garden, and he called and he said, "People these days see this flower as in a dream. You think you're dreaming this flower? The flower is real." Here we are in the paradox of it's real and it's not real. We're all one and we operate, we're not one, not two. We're not separate. So Lu Hassan has often heard Master Chao preach that everything has the same root and belongs to the same great body. Lu thinks he may know what these words mean, but he asks his friend for guidance. Predictably, Nan Chu's reply sets us up to reach the wrong conclusion. If we want to awaken, we'll have to bring our dreaming to a stop. Then, supposedly, we'll see things as they are. But in fact, the more we struggle to extract ourselves from appearances, the stronger the magic grows, along with our nagging sense of loneliness. So far are we from the one body. Renunciation just won't work. Giving up on the world, giving up on having a body, giving up on our senses doesn't work. We will just wake up empty and lonely. But how do we be in this body and keep letting go? How do we cherish our senses and keep letting go? The world we take for granted, with its gardens and flowers, arises through an artistry not from our own, but from a place deeper than thought. The world is here as an expression of life. The world is here as an expression of Buddha nature. And as we participate in that artistry, we recognize the visible as part of the invisible whole. This moment is an expression of life. This being in this body, this being with this world is an expression of life. When we participate in the artistry, we recognize the visible as part of an invisible whole. Their form and emptiness, as Zen tradition says, are like the matching halves of a broken coin joined together at last. form and emptiness, emptiness and form. Things that can make our minds go a bit crazy. I don't know what happens to you when you read those words, when we chant the Heart Sutra. It's like, what? But if we can see that actually this arising and this going away, this forming and this dissipating are all an expression of Buddha nature. There's a poem by Ellen Bass called Any Common Desolation. It's a great title for a poem. Any common desolation can be enough to make you look up at the yellowed lives of the apple tree, the few that survived the rains and frost, shot with late afternoon sun. They glow a deep orange gold against a blue so sheer a single bird would rip it like silk. You may have to break your heart, but it isn't nothing to know even one moment alive. The sound of an oar in an oarlock, or a ruminant animal tiring grass, the smell of grated ginger, the ruby neon of the liquor store sign, warm socks. You remember your mother, her precision of ceremony, as she gathered the white cotton, slipped it over your toes, turned up the heel, drew up the heel, turned the cuff. A breath can uncoil as you walk across your own muddy yard, the Big Dipper pouring night down over you, and everything you dread, all you can't bear, dissolves, and like a needle slipped into your vein, the sudden rush of the world. So many of those pantoums yesterday were the sudden rush of the world, weren't they? The sudden rush of the cold water in the sea holding you up. Sudden rush of the world. So I saw a beautiful silver pendant made by an artist, silversmith, Bianca O'Neill. And it was just a long, it was actually looked like a match, a spent match. It was just a long wooden shaft with the blackened end, a broken blackened end. And she made this. She said, this led to a consideration of grasping at joy, how the intensity to make a moment last takes away from its purity. I use the match now to remind myself to cultivate gratitude, to remember all that has come and gone, to not wish for things to be more than they are, and to recognize their brevity, like the fleeting glow of a lit match. Our lives are like that fleeting glow, aren't they? We are all just a fleeting glow in a moment. We can make a small light in the darkness. We can cherish the patches of warmth that we offer each other. We can share the darkness and the light, and the joy and the sorrow, and the waking up empty and lonely, and the courage we have every day to get up and do this same stuff again and again, and occasionally even be nice to people. I have about 4 poems to choose from. What can I say? What can I say that I have not said before? So I'll say it again. The leaf has a song in it. Stone is the face of patience. Inside the river there is an unfinishable story, and you are somewhere in it, and it will never end until it ends. Take your busy heart to the art museum and the Chamber of Commerce, but take it also to the forest. The song you heard singing in the leaf when you were a child is singing still. I am of years lived so far 74, and the leaf is singing still. A lifetime isn't long enough for the beauty of the world. Thank you.